This episode is sponsored by the Global Center for Religious Research and Rafaela Taster's online course, Does God Exist?
Hey kids, Derek Bennett here. Yesterday's little impromptu video discussion went so well that I figured we'd give it another shot today with a different topic. The historicity of Jesus. Did he actually exist as a historical man, or is he just mythical from top to bottom? This is a very controversial topic right now. We're likely to break out into World War III as a result of this very question, which is silly. It's ridiculous. I don't have any emotional connection to the question. I don't care. At the end of the day, I don't give a shit whether there was a historical Jesus, and that really ought to be everyone's frame of mind here, unless you're a Christian. But I digress. So what I will say is that I lean toward historicity. In other words, I lean toward the likelihood that there was a historical Jesus, and that in the New Testament he is represented as monumentally deified in a manner that is consistent with Jewish and pagan themes of the time. But I do think that there was a man there at bottom. Now, I am not a dogmatist about this. In fact, I could be wrong. Everyone say that with me. I could be wrong. So I don't dogmatize about it. I don't really have a dog in this race. I am not throwing my hat into the ring concerning the whole mythicist versus historicist debate. I know this could be taken that way, but I'm not getting involved. If someone wants to fight about this or get angry about it, I'm going to ignore you. I'm not going to get involved. All that I'm doing is sharing my opinion on this, and if others have different opinions about this, that's okay. That's okay. Why not let 100 flowers bloom? So I'm good with that. So what are my reasons for thinking that Jesus was historical? I will say I don't think the evidence for his historical existence is overwhelming by any means. Let's take Josephus, for instance. I have come to a place where I am frankly agnostic about whether or not Josephus ever mentioned Jesus. The most famous passage, the Testimonium Flavianum, where he gives us this fantastic little brief on Jesus. As even Christian scholars admit, this has been heavily interpolated. Not everything in there is surely authentic or original to Josephus. Although once you excise the obvious interpolations, what we're left with is this little kernel of a story about Jesus sandwiched between two calamities that does seem like an odd fit. So it could be a wholesale forgery. But at the same time, we also know that Josephus could go off into little tangents and discussing a guy who was put to death under the reign of Pontius Pilate is not completely out of keeping with the context of the passage there in Josephus. So to me, it could go either way. It could be partially authentic, it could be a wholesale forgery, and I just don't know. The James passage, that for a long time I've always, not always, but for a long time I've thought that is probably authentic, where he talks about Jesus, the brother of, or Jesus called Christ, who, I am completely flubbing this. Jesus, he talks about the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others. Bam! Got it. The whole business there with the high priest Ananias and his bringing James and some others before the Sanhedrin, having them stoned to death for being breakers of the law. I just assume this probably does refer to our Jesus and James, but most recently I read an article by an actual historicist, amateur scholar like myself, Dave Allen, where he says, granted, he thinks there was a historical Jesus. He thinks that there is an interpolation here, that it would make more sense if this were James, the son of Joseph, who is mentioned just a little beforehand. That makes an awful lot of sense as well. So again, as to whether or not Josephus ever mentioned Jesus, I'm agnostic. I really couldn't tell you for sure. Let's vape about. Let's bring our hands together and vape about this for just a moment. That's good. It's a habit. I'm not editing that out. I'm keeping it. That's a habit I definitely want to encourage. It's good for you. My doctor said so. And he doesn't lie. He's my doctor. Okay, so besides Josephus, what do we have? I mean, the Gospels are, in my opinion, primarily creative literary works. I don't think you can bank on those a whole lot. In terms of the biographical data that they provide, I do think that this is primarily literary and creative work. Christians will disagree with me on this. That's fine. I think we all know why. But I digress. And so there's Paul. And Paul does not give us a lot. Bart Ehrman teaches a course on New Testament where he has his students write down everything that they can know about Jesus biographically just from reading Paul's letters. And lo and behold, it all fits on a 3x5 card, a 3x5 index card. We don't learn a lot. What I personally take from this is not that there was no historical Jesus, but that Paul just doesn't know a great deal about him. And of course, he doesn't know about what all is in the Gospels because the Gospels have not been, they're literary works that just have not been written yet. Gerd Ludemann took the position that though Paul didn't really know a great deal about Jesus, he knew of Jesus. He knew of such a person. So I don't think any arguments from silence work well here against the historicity of Jesus. I think that Ludemann's take on this makes sense. Paul knows of such a guy. He doesn't know a great deal about him. And so here we are in the 21st century, left with very little in terms of what we can know about this man. Vaguely that he was probably a failed apocalyptic prophet. And as I had mentioned earlier, he was hugely amplified, deified, lionized in a manner that was consistent with Jewish and Greco-Roman and various other pagan themes of the day. And don't tell me that Jews were not susceptible to pagan ideas. That's ridiculous for reasons I get into in my other videos. So, the other option here is that Paul is speaking of a purely celestial figure who never set foot on earth, and that's all he ever was. That Paul's not speaking of someone about whom he knows little, but of someone who was just a celestial figure from the get-go. What I will say is that I'm not personally persuaded by this. Now, that's not an argument from incredulity. I see so many people nowadays who love to accuse others of committing logical fallacies when it's clear that they themselves don't know a whiff about logic or how logical fallacies work. These are kindergartners playing with advanced toys, and they really ought to put them down until they actually figure out what the hell they're talking about. Sorry to be so condescending, but not sorry. Look, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that I don't find that persuasive, therefore it's false, that is a non sequitur and surely an argument from incredulity. That's fallacious. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying, point blank, I am not personally persuaded by the argument. It may still yet be true. I am just not convinced myself. Most certainly, by the time we get to Paul, when he's writing his letters, assuming there was a historical Jesus, he's dead and gone for a good couple of decades now. So Paul knows only of the celestial revelatory figure that he goes on and on about, that he now has this kind of contact with which he has established, basically placing himself in the role of a prophet here, who has this kind of connection, this kind of communication, this divine line with the Christ. He's now a celestial figure. I don't think that that's what he had been historically. When he talks about, let's set aside the question of whether James, as he's represented in Paul's letters, was a biological brother of Jesus. I happen to think, based on what I've read in scholarship, that that's probably what he means, but let's just bracket that. Regardless, Paul is speaking of these Jerusalem pillars, whom he has to seek out. He travels to Jerusalem in Galatians to meet up with these guys because they have some kind of place of priority. Why is that? I reckon it's because this was Jesus's original posse. It could be that maybe these were the guys who more or less invented the myth whole cloth, but I just don't get that sense. I get the sense that these so-called pillars were the original Jesus followers, and that's why it was incumbent upon Paul to meet with them to ensure that he was supposedly getting his message straight. Though I don't think that I don't get it that they completely agreed on everything. Not from reading Galatians. Let's vape about this. Join me in divine vapory. Let's have a moment. That tastes good. My Bill Clinton impression. I bet you're underwhelmed. Fountain drinks, the best. All right. Paul certainly, he certainly represents Jesus, depicts him in very kind of middle Platonic, Philonic terms. I agree with Richard Carrier that the celestial image of God, the agent of creation, God's first begotten Son, these are Philonic terms. You find them in Philo of Alexandria, in which Philo is attributing this to the divine Logos. What we have to understand is that in the ancient world, it was very, very common to deify historical persons in ways that were consistent with purely fictional and legendary figures. This happened with Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus was the Son of God and the Savior of the world. He was born from a God and a mortal woman. He actually healed pestilences common to Greeks and barbarians. He was able to calm the seas. He ascended into heaven. These things were said about Caesar Augustus, and yet we know that there was historically a Caesar Augustus. Apollonius of Tyana is a very obvious one. Very Jesus-like type figure. And Philostratus wrote his Life of Apollonius later than the Gospels, so it's not that the Gospels are riffing on Philostratus, and probably not even the vice versa. It's just the same kind of thing from that kind of general Greco-Roman milieu. So Apollonius of Tyana ranks high, very high on that rank-Raglan scale, where it looks like this could be a completely fictional character, and yet we are pretty certain there was a historical Apollonius of Tyana. Several letters are attributed to him. Not all scholars think that all of these letters are authentic. However, most, I believe, most think that his letter on sacrifices is actually authentically written by the hand of Apollonius of Tyana. So we have good reason for thinking Apollonius was actually a historical person who, like Jesus, was just massively embellished and deified. There are other such figures from antiquity as well. So when we hear about someone ranking very high on the rank Raglan mythotype and having all of these legendary and fanciful attributes and features and so forth, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were a historical. It could mean that, but it's just not necessarily the case. Why? Why again do I think that Jesus was historical? I think that the birth, the emergence of Christianity requires some kind of explanation, some kind of impetus, something that catalyzed or galvanized these people. Now, I'm not saying that a mythical individual could not have done that. It's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. I just think it far more likely that the events surrounding a historical personage are just the type of thing that would have catalyzed the movement. As we know from looking at other religious movements, organizations, and cults, cognitive dissonance reduction is extremely common in these types of movements. Very common. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, the Millerites, who went on to become the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Lubavitcher movement, Sabbatai Sevi, you name it. So many of these religious movements, especially when they're particularly zealous or apocalyptic in nature, surprisingly enough, it is cognitive dissonance reduction that serves to galvanize people. And I just think it altogether likely that if there was someone such as Jesus, who was a messianic figure like so many others from the time, that people were placing all their hopes, they were really placing their bets on this guy being the one who was going to conquer their oppressors, that's going to overcome imperial oppression and rule and bring about the Davidic dynasty and restore things to the heyday of David's rule on the throne. They have so much writing on this. And does he do it? No. Instead, he meets with one of the most crushing, excruciating, humiliating deaths that you can possibly imagine. Death by crucifixion. And contra what the apologists say about this, that, oh, well, the movement should have just died with him. You know, they just throw their hands up in the air and say, I was wrong, I was mistaken, guess I'll pack it up and go home now. That's not what people in these kinds of movements do. That is not what they do. No, they double down. They spiritualize it. They find some other kind of way to feel as though, oh, we were right all along. We just misunderstood how this was really supposed to come about. They look to passages like Isaiah 53 and the suffering servant, the quintessential Israelite captive into Babylon who is vindicated and is able to return to the homeland after they're freed by their Persian intercessors. This figure is tormented, pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, and yet he will see the light of life and be satisfied. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. My goodness, there is your ex post facto rationalization for what the crucifixion of Jesus was all about. It was a sin atoning death, and he has been raised and exalted to the right hand of God. All of this makes perfect sense on the cognitive dissonance model of Christian origins. Doesn't mean it's right. Once again, I could be wrong. It's just a matter of not assuming that this is factually the case, but simply applying a model or a hypothesis and then seeing how well that's borne out by the data. And it fits. It fits really well. Once again, it could be that all of this was sparked by the confluence of mythical and legendary motifs that converged upon one another to form a purely mythical figure. And again, this isn't scientific. It's not. But I get the sense that that's not what we're dealing with. That the actual impetus, the actual thing that catalyzed and galvanized this movement was some kind of cognitive dissonance type of scenario, which would have been well explained by the actual tragic suffering, death, and crucifixion of a historical Jesus. So I'm right in line with Philip Davies on this, who wrote a great article, Did Jesus Exist? He says, look, mythicism ought to be a viable option. Let's put it on the table. Let's discuss it, not dismiss it, not say that mythicists are cranks or crackheads or idiots. It's worth considering, okay? So to my mythicist friends, please know that I sincerely feel that way. And we don't have to agree with each other in order to like each other. I don't hate anyone for disagreeing with me on this, as long as they're nice about it. Be nice. Be nice. But yeah, my sense is well, I've already told you about my sense, so we'll cut that part. I was saying Philip Davies, I think, nails it. He says that mythicism ought to be a viable option, but the most parsimonious, economical explanation for Christianity is the actual the actual life and ministry and cruel death of some kind of religious guru that would have sparked just this kind of thing through religious deification and cognitive dissonance reduction and everything that follows. So that's where I stand on mythicism and the historicity of Jesus. I think there probably was a guy. I'm not 100% certain about it, and I don't dogmatize about it. Those are just my thoughts. That's my opinion. Agree or disagree, I don't care, because like I said, emotionally, I don't have anything riding on this. I really don't. Fuck Jesus. I don't care. This has been fun. We'll do this again. And if you could please support me on Patreon or give me one of those little thanks where you throw a few bucks at me with a little thanks if you enjoyed this and got something from it. Check out these courses offered by the Global Center for Religious Research on the philosophy of religion, does God exist, as well as religious trauma. Check that stuff off. Don't check it off. Check it out. I'm 45 years old and I'm losing it. This has been fun. We'll do this again. I heart you, and Mm-mm-mm. You know where this is going.
Does God exist? I doubt it. But if you'd like to explore the arguments for and against the Almighty's existence, I highly recommend Dr. Raphael Lataster's online course, Does God Exist?, hosted by the Global Center for Religious Research. Delve into fascinating topics like cosmology and morality, as well as alternatives to both atheism and conventional theism. As a thanks for being here, Atheologica viewers will get $50 off their enrollment just by clicking the link in the description or by going to gcrr.org/courses. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on future content. You can also support me on Patreon, where you'll get access to past presentations and an exclusive ebook, including invaluable references and sources. Any help you can provide, no matter how great or small, will go a long way toward keeping this channel going. Big thanks, by the way, to my current patrons. Your encouragement and support mean the world to me.